I like to focus my energy on megalithic sites. I prefer to be an expert in a narrow field than know little bits about everything. All of Peru is an archaeological site, whether you're on the coast or in the highlands or in the jungle. That's why my heart lives there. It's laser flat in terms of sophistication. So obviously ancient high technology was utilized at this location. So far, an unknown ancient civilization. Ollantaytambo is an example. Whoever the original ancient builders were, they were able to use levitation to move the stones. That the original Paracas elongated-headed people were born with elongated heads. What we got to see was a full intact skeleton with an elongated head. And then finally I looked to my left and there was what turned out to be a 7 to 9 month old fetus where the head was the size of the torso. They are a clear indication of a very advanced technical civilization before the dynastic time period. Anybody who says UFOs don't exist have never seen one. So it's easy to discount something you've never experienced.
You've been a highly requested guest, and so I definitely appreciate your willingness to fly all the way up here from Peru. So very cool. It's not an easy trip to make just to do a podcast. So I'm very grateful that you chose to join us and share some of your knowledge with us today. So,
well, I'm very honored. Thank you, Matt. I've been watching your show, I think, probably for about 4 months now. So, as far as I can tell, you've had anybody and everybody that I know in this field on already. So I'm very honored to be joining, with quite an illustrious group of speakers.
For sure. Yeah, it's been a great group of people, and you're a perfect guest for the channel. And I know my audience is already excited about hearing from you today based on just an initial stuff that I put out on X about our conversation. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to dive into it. And so let's do that. So how long have you been in Peru?
I've been living in Peru full-time for about 15 years. And I first went there about 20 years ago.
Okay. And what was it about Peru that kind of captured your interest and made it be a place that you wanted to settle down and live?
Well, it's kind of a strange story. I was living in Canada at the time, and I literally woke up in the morning, and the word Peru sounded in my head 3 times. And I thought, well, this is odd. What's in Peru? Oh, Machu Picchu's in Peru. Maybe I should go. So at that point, I more or less immediately made plans to go down and travel around Peru for about 3 weeks on my own, just to see. I'd done no research on the country before that. So I just wanted to see what I could experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know you've done a ton of work on the elongated skulls in Paracas. Am I saying that right?
Yep,
Paracas. And so I know we'll dive into that specifically. But I was actually in Peru the same time that you were giving a tour. We were both at Machu Picchu at the same time last year in November. And I saw you giving a tour in Machu Picchu, and we didn't know each other, so I didn't want to interrupt. You had a whole group of 25 or so people that you were taking around, but pretty fun, pretty coincidental. How many times have you been to that site, would you say?
About 100.
Yeah. Okay.
First 3 times I paid, 97 plus times other people have paid for me to guide them around. So I'm very honored by that.
Yep. Well, cool. So what is kind of your overall picture of human history and of reality? I mean, you're obviously fascinated with these ancient sites and with megalithic architecture. And so how do you kind of explain what we see in Peru, what we see in Egypt, what we see kind of all around the world? We see these incredible, unexplainable megalithic sites. Like, what is your best theory, or what's your understanding of how, why, when these sites were created?
Well, I think a lot of the megalithic sites that we see, especially in places like Egypt and Peru and Bolivia and Turkey, Jordan, I think they all predate what's called the Younger Dryas hypothesis of major catastrophic damage occurring between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. How far back that means beyond 12,800, I can't tell you, but I can see 4 distinct styles of megalithic construction. In Egypt, you have very linear construction, like the pyramids, and very left brain, very logical. And then in Peru, it's a more playful, polygonal, multifaceted stones, like pillowing, etc. That's more of a right brain, playful aspect. And then the site called Pumapunku and Tiwanaku in Bolivia, I think those are unique constructions. I think whoever made those, and it's one site, it's just 2 sites behind different fences. I think whoever did that only did that. And then also we have Easter Island, where I see 2 distinct time frames. I see the Polynesian arrival, maybe 300 AD, and then the construction of what are called the Moai figures, maybe 6 to 8 feet tall with, kind of flattened noses, very Polynesian looking. And then the much bigger ones, I think, are far, far older with the more so-called aquiline nose. So I see 2 different time frames. So I see, I personally think there were at least 4 different megalithic builders, whether they were human or extraterrestrial. I'm open, because we simply don't know. People say it had to be human. It's like, well, we don't know that, or it had to be alien. We don't know that. I'm open to all the possibilities.
Yeah, and I don't see why that's such a big controversial topic for people, and why people just shut down at that possibility that extraterrestrials could have been involved in ancient human history. It doesn't seem like such a stretch just to consider that as a possibility. I mean, I think that a lot of people use that as like a weapon against open-minded thinking, and a way to kind of suppress people's thoughts and conversations like the one that we're about to have. But why is that such a big leap? Why is that such a big jump? I mean, people now, if you listen to people talking about what's happening with the UAP phenomenon and the whistleblowers that are coming out, and I mean, these are people that are deep within the United States government that are saying that, yes, we've been visited regularly for thousands of years by extraterrestrials, and the technology is now being reverse engineered, and that's what we're seeing. That's what we've recorded with, and that's what all these pilots are seeing, and that's what people around the world, millions of people have seen this technology. So I personally don't feel like it's that much of a stretch to consider that possibility, or that possibility is one of the ways that could explain some of what we see in terms of ancient megalithic culture. And so I don't know, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I totally agree. I know, probably a lot of academics insist that it was all done by humans. Possibly from cultures that were more technologically advanced than we are, but most of them won't admit that. They will insist that everything in Egypt was done by the dynastic people using primitive technology, but all it takes is asking very simple questions about how certain things were made, and their theories just fall apart within seconds.
They do,
yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I had Zahi Hawass on, and one of the things that I asked him about how things were, how the pyramid was made, and his answer was they believed in the afterlife. That was it. That was the answer. That was the answer to how they were made. And so it's a redirect. It's like it's a changing of the subject to something that has nothing to do with what the question was. And to your point, it's that's what you get a lot of times from the experts. It's because they don't know, but they feel like they have to give an answer, and they feel like that being an expert on this, they have to give an answer. But in reality, nobody knows. Nobody knows how the pyramids were made. Nobody knows how the walls of Sacsayhuaman were made. Nobody knows about Ollantaytambo and a lot of the interlocking polygonal walls or even the colonial style walls, how that stuff was made. So discussing these possibilities, I think, is just a very, very healthy thing to do.
Oh, definitely. And Like you say, they always have to have an answer to any question, no matter how, in some cases, preposterous they are. As an example, you know Chris Dunn, the engineer and machinist. He was on early podcasts, I guess in the 90s, early 2000s, with a piece of granite and a bronze chisel. And then he would strike the piece of granite with the bronze chisel, and the bronze chisel automatically the tip would bend. And so the academics found out about what he was doing, and their explanation was that they would have 1,000 men lined up in a line with a bunch of tables in front of them, resharpening the chisels after one strike. And that's like totally ludicrous.
Yeah, for sure.
That's one example that I know of. But yeah, there's so much of that. They have to have an answer no matter what.
Yeah. Well, let's start with Bolivia, maybe, and Ryan, if you can pull up some of that area, the Pumapunka, and maybe you kind of just talk us through that, because that's the one, talking to you at dinner last night, that sticks out to you, and I think sticks out to most people as being kind of a one-off in terms of its construction style, and just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So. Maybe we take a look at some images of that, and you've been there how many times?
About 60.
60 times, yeah. So you give tours there and have analyzed the site thoroughly. So what is it about this site that really jumps out for you?
Well, the major thing is that most academics believe that the Tiwanaku culture that existed between 100 and 1000 AD were responsible for doing all of this precision stonework. Again, using bronze chisels and stone hammers. And you can see just from the pictures the level of precision. The site is made of two different types of stone. One is red sandstone, which comes from a quarry 8 miles over 2 mountain ranges to the west. And then the gray stone is called andesite, and it comes from the top of a volcano about 50 miles to the northeast. And that's been proven because Arthur Poznański, who was a Bolivian who spent 50 years studying the site, he was able to get to the quarry, take samples, and then take samples from the site itself and have them sent to a lab and analyzed, like cut thin sections and look through with microscopes, probably in the 30s and 40s. And the samples from the quarry, the samples from the site were identical. So that blows the theory that they were so-called geopolymers. They, stone cut from a quarry. But the largest one that's still there is a red sandstone base piece, which is probably at least 150 tons. So how would you move a 150-ton block of stone 8 miles across 2 mountain ranges when there are no native trees that grow in that area? There's nothing to use as rollers.
Right.
Right.
So how did it get there? And so how did they do it? I mean, what is the explanation for how those were moved up mountains like that?
They don't have an explanation. And for moving from the quarry, for the andesite, they say that they brought the material down to Lake Titicaca, which is right at the bottom of the volcano, and then built rafts made out of reeds, and then transported them south to the site itself. But some of the andesite blocks, like the famous Sun Gate, that's 11 tons.
Yeah.
You'd have to build a really big reed boat to move that thing.
Right. So no explanation for how the stuff was transported there. And then what about for how those perfectly straight lines and squares and rectangles and drill holes? I mean, what's the current explanation for how they were carved and cut?
Bronze chisels and stone hammers.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what do you think?
Well, as we were discussing, Pumapunku and Tiwanaku are a one-off. There's nothing on the planet that I've ever seen, either in person or in photographs or videos or books, of any other site that looks exactly the same in terms of technology. There are places, like in Ethiopia, there's a site called Axum, where you see very similar style of cutting, but not exactly the same. So, and the level of precision in the past, I've taken like a 2-foot level and put it up against the front of the H blocks, and it fits perfectly on that surface. There's no wobbling, there's no irregularity. It's laser flat in terms of sophistication. So obviously ancient high technology was utilized at this location by so far an unknown ancient civilization. That's why I keep going back. I find Puma Punku and Tiwanaku the most puzzling location on the planet.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Ryan, while we're talking, Mike Collins, Wandering Wolf, had some aerial video that he was able to get during COVID of this site. It might be cool to show that at this time. And then it seems like there was like some major catastrophe, like some major either blast or wave or something that hit this area and just destroyed it and just threw these 1,000-ton blocks just all over the place, hundreds of tons of blocks and stone just pushed and moved just extreme distances at some point in human history. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that? What could that have been?
Well, what appears to have happened is that 13,000 plus years ago, the Altiplano, which is that part of Bolivia, which is like the high plains, the ground actually lifted up on the northern side and then slightly sunk on the southern side, because originally 13,000 plus years ago, Lake Titicaca was 100 feet higher than it is today. And it was 10 times the size. And so during these cataclysmic changes, you had an uplifting of the ground itself again from the north to the south. And that's what created what's called the Uyuni salt flats in Bolivia. 90% of the water rushed down, reached a flat surface, and then all of the water evaporated, leaving huge, maybe the largest salt deposit in the world. So you can even see evidence at Tiwanaku of water weathering on some of the vertical surfaces of what's called the Kalasasaya enclosure. So you can see this almost like scoop marks, but I think that was done by ancient water 13,000 plus years ago.
So what do you think the event was that caused that?
Well, it actually may have been what we were discussing before. It was called the Younger Dryas, so 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. There are all sorts of earth changes, all sorts of catastrophic events that happened like all over the planet, not all at the same time, but over a 1,200-year time period. So you could have had asteroids hitting, you could have had meteorites hitting, meteors, rushing by or striking, rising of the sea level by 400 feet. So all sorts of different things occurred.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was a time of incredible catastrophe and change, and a lot of extinctions with woolly mammoth and saber-toothed tiger. I mean,
right.
all the megafauna went extinct at that point in time, and the mainstream scientific explanation for how all of those species went extinct was overhunting by humans, which is obviously crazy. Mm-hmm. Humans went through a bottleneck at that time as well. So, yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Something happened, something cataclysmic. But when we're talking about an area that's that high up in the Andes, it's just like, how, what could have happened there to have caused all of those blocks to get, destroyed like that? I mean, I guess any of the things that you alluded to possibly, with meteors or space impacts or, massive earthquakes or whatever, I guess. But it's just, it seems like that area that high up would have been a little bit more protected so as not to experience such a dramatic cataclysmic change that would have impacted this area.
Well, the site where the andesite comes from to the northeast, that's actually a dormant volcano. So there is evidence that, say maybe 12,000 years ago, that the volcano exploded.
Okay.
Because, of course, South American volcanoes, they're not like the ones in Hawaii where you get like lava flow. They blow up. So it's quite possible that Cerro Capio, which is the name of the volcano, exploded and then threw a lot of stone material into Lake Titicaca, creating a small tsunami on Lake Titicaca itself, because in that area, the water of the lake is about 900 feet deep. So you could create a tsunami. And then it moved south and literally scooped up mud and debris from the bottom of the lake in the shallower part and completely buried Pumapunku.
Wow.
Some of the vertical stones at Tiwanaku are like at least 20 feet tall. So they would have still been, after this event, which would have partially covered Tiwanaku, some of the pillars would still be standing out. So when the Tiwanaku civilization show up there around 100 AD, they would have found Tiwanaku because they would see some of these vertical stones sticking up from the ground. But it looks like Pumapunku was completely buried. And so that's why there was very little usage by the Tiwanaku culture of Pumapunku, because most of it was buried under mud.
So the unspoken part here is that I mean, if this site was created when the mainstream tells us that this site was created, which is what, just 1,500 years ago or
between 1,900 and 1,000 years ago.
Okay. So yeah, right in that time frame. So, I mean, there's not been any natural disaster within the last 1,900 years that could explain what we see at this site, right?
Well, I'm sure that anything like that would have been recorded by the resident population somehow, like maybe in glyphs or like carvings or something like that. So as far as I know, no. And when we get to talking about Cusco, we're going to see evidence of, again, cataclysmic earthquake damage that was never recorded by the Inca, so it had to have happened before their time. And we're talking like major damage. The standard story is that the Inca arrived from Lake Titicaca about 1,000 years ago and established Cusco as their center. There was nothing there except maybe a little bit of farming and small populations, but there's clear evidence that it was hammered by a huge earthquake that literally blew the corners and tops off of the megalithic structures. So what the Inca did is they simply adopted those sites and then built protective walls around and on top of them, out of respect for whoever was there before.
Yeah, so if any of that can be proven or shown, then obviously it proves that these sites are significantly older than what the mainstream story, tells us that they are. So that's fascinating that there was that type of activity 12,000 years ago, but we haven't really seen that within the last 2,000 years. But we do see evidence at all of these sites for that dramatic, massive, cataclysmic kind of events that did occur 12,000 years ago. So,
right.
Yeah. So, okay. So what about, just shifting into Peru a little bit, just down the road by about 3 hours, right? So, So Cusco and the Sacred Valley area, there's so many. We were just there last November, and I was just absolutely blown away by the sites there and the walls, and you almost just sit there and you look at places like Sacsayhuaman and you just laugh. Walking up to it, it's like, how is this possible? Like, how could this have been done? You've got rocks that are 25 feet tall and 12 feet wide. How could these have been carved and moved and transported, quarried, transported, placed, carved, with primitive people, with primitive tools, hammers, chisels, and be able to fit these all in together and leave no seams, leave absolutely nothing? You look at it, these drainage pipes that go through there, you look at it and it's like, it's a joke that these things could have been made with traditional methods of hammering, chiseling, as you're walking along these walls and feeling these blocks and seeing the seams, the lack of seams that exist between them. To how many strikes of a copper chisel and a stone hammer is it going to take? You're flattening off the one that you're placing on the top, you're smoothing off the one you're placing on the bottom, a couple of chisels, let's lift it up a little bit, set it back down. It doesn't quite fit. Let's lift it up a couple more hits of the chisel, and you'd have to do that, a million times per stone in order to make this fit. I mean, there's clearly some kind of a technology at play here, or something to be able to produce these walls at such a massive scale so perfectly. It's mind-boggling. And so I guess this is a 90-degree turn at Sacsayhuaman in a corner there of they're not only carving the blocks on a straight line, they're cutting and carving the blocks so that they form these 90-degree angles and interlock with each other. I mean, it's for me, this was the most fascinating site that I've ever been to, and just completely unexplained when you walk up on it. So anyway, I've been dying to ask you about Sacsayhuaman and kind of get your thoughts on that construction style and how that was made. And you've been there probably 100 times, I'm sure. Yeah. So thoughts there?
Cusco and that area is not flat. It's like rolling hills and mountains. So for the Inca to be able to somehow cut a block, say 150 tons, and then move it across the landscape 3 or more miles to that location when no indigenous trees grow straight. The indigenous trees grow in curves. The straight trees you see in Cusco now are eucalyptus that came from Australia in the 1880s. So the indigenous trees do not grow straight, so you can't use them as rollers. The idea that they made stone rollers is pretty preposterous as well. So yeah, that is one of the most amazing ancient sites that there is in Peru. And when the Spanish first arrived in Cusco, they supposedly went up on top of the hill where Sacsayhuaman is located and asked the local people, "Did you make this?" And they said, "No, we found this when we got here." So the indigenous people are saying that Cusco is much older than the Inca themselves. And the stonework is just evidence because the first day that I was in Cusco, I had a local guide and called Jesus, and he took me, I said, I want to see the big stonework. And he took me to the core of ancient Cusco, and I saw quite primitive-looking construction, and then I saw almost perfect construction. And I said, "Who did this work?" And he said, "The Inca." And having been using power tools ever since I was a child, I just looked at that and said, "That's impossible. This is technology of some kind." And then I asked him what kind of tools, and he said copper chisels and stone hammers. And I said, "That's impossible." So that's what really triggered my interest. I didn't do a lot of research about Peru before I went, but my first day of walking through Cusco and seeing these megalithic marvels started my interest, which led me 5 years later to moving to the country, because Peru's a small country, but it's probably got more enigmas in it than any other country of its size or even greater on the planet. Like almost everything is mysterious, everything is ancient. All of Peru is an archaeological site, whether you're on the coast or in the highlands or in the jungle. So, that's why my heart lives there.
Incredible to think about what it would have looked like in its heyday.
Yeah.
I mean, like all of the ancient sites put together in Peru, many of them are probably not even discovered yet, right?
It's hard to tell. The interesting thing is that almost all of the megalithic sites are along what is almost a straight line called the Path of Viracocha that goes from the northwest to the southeast. And along that line are all of the major megalithic sites like Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, which is quite curious. So some people think that it was a band of energy, sort of like the Michael and Mary lines in England. So a band of energy going from the northwest to the southeast, and possibly it was the energy itself that was part of the whole process of energizing these ancient locations. I did a tour of Peru and Bolivia with Chris Dunn, who we talked about before, and we specifically had some people who were really good at dowsing, with rods. And two of them were so amazing that they could literally take even a dowsing stone on a map, and they could find sites along or on the map because the stone would start to vibrate or go in a circular or counterclockwise way. So that was, that was quite intriguing. It's the only time we did a tour where we had people like that sensitive and that knowledgeable about ley lines and dowsing.
So I was just going to ask, so it would be on a ley line then, this?
It seems to be. It's about 100, they indicated it was something like 100 yards wide.
Okay.
And again, went straight through all of these ancient sites. There's another site along the way that's on the line that's called the Temple of Viracocha, or Wiracocha. And there, the bottom part of that is megalithic. And then the top 80% is mud brick. So it's another clear indication where the Inca found an ancient megalithic site that had been damaged by some kind of cataclysm and then simply rebuilt with the local material, which in that case was mud brick on top of it. Like that's another example of a night and day pre-Inca construction with Inca construction on top.
Okay, well, good. Let's maybe. What about Ollantaytambo? I mean, some of the work that's done there.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that site? What's unique about it? How does it vary? How does it differ from some of the other kind of sites that we see in Peru?
Well, most of the sites where we find megalithic construction, the megalithic is at the bottom, and then the Inca is on top. At Ollantaytambo, it's actually the opposite. There are 6 giant stones up on the hill at Ollantaytambo proper, which were part of what they called the Sun Temple. And it's clear that that site was hit by a massive earthquake cataclysm in the very distant past that literally blew the place up. So that's all that's left is the northern part with the 6 stones in a row. There used to be an eastern wall, a western wall, and a southern wall. But whatever earthquake hit that place, it, basically blew it up. So what happened was the western wall, the eastern wall fell down, and the eastern wall, big megalithic blocks all broke. So when the Inca arrived there, probably in the 1200s AD maybe, they utilized the broken stone to build staircases going up to the so-called Sun Temple. And then there are stones on the western side that are down, which they were able to move up partially and push together, but they had to fill the gaps between the stones with rubble, smaller stones and stuff, because they couldn't get them to fit perfectly back together again. So that's what's curious about that location, is that the megalithic is on top, the Inca is lower down, and of course you've been there, so you saw the giant, you have standard terracing that goes up maybe 5 feet tall, etc. But at Ollantaytambo, you have terraces that are 12 feet tall, each terrace going up.
Yeah.
So-called Royal Inca terracing. That's all Inca construction. There's no evidence of there being a megalithic staircase to get you from the valley floor up to where the Sun Temple was. So it appears it was simply a ramp at about a 40-degree angle. So how they were able to, shove these giant stones up there is very doubtful.
Yeah.
It's more, I think Ollantaytambo is an example of whoever the original ancient builders were, they were able to use levitation to move the stones from the quarry, which is on top of the mountain, the granite quarry on top of the mountain on the left-hand side of the picture there. And I think they had to levitate them across the valley, because the standard story is that it was like, thousands of people would wrap ropes around one of the giant blocks and move the stone down a makeshift trail that became the actual quarry trail down to the river, across the river, and then back up that hill. But another story is that during Inca times, one of the Inca rulers decided that he was so powerful that he was going to replicate how the megalithic work was done. So he had something like 1,000 men go up to the quarry, where there still are actually some big unfinished blocks located, and told them to wrap ropes around it. And so as they were moving the stone down the hill, they got too close to the edge, and supposedly the stone plummeted down several hundred feet, pulling all of the workers with them. And when the Inca found out about that, he decided that he wasn't going to try to copy what the ancients had done because they couldn't.
So how do you visualize that? So when you're at that site and you're looking across the valley to what people think is the quarry for those huge blocks, it makes no sense how they could have. How they could have moved those huge blocks all the way down. You got to go over a river, right? I mean, there was water. You gotta bring it then all the way up the hill, and then somehow you're lifting these massive stone blocks up a hill with just sheer manpower. It just seems impossible.
Yeah.
So the levitation thing is interesting. So can you double click on how you think that might have happened, or what the technology or who the people were that were doing it, or what that would have looked like from a practical standpoint?
Well, I think it was vibration or sound that was utilized in order to be able to levitate. Some people will scoff at the idea of levitation, but we've already shown that it was almost, if not impossible, for the Inca to have moved, 80 or 100-ton block of stone from the quarry, which we know is on top of the mountain across the way.
Okay.
Down. Actually, the trail only goes 2/3 of the way up to the quarry. It goes from being 20 feet wide to 10 feet wide to 6 feet wide to disappearing. So the stones would have to have been moved at least to the third of the way down without a noticeable trail of any kind. So, I believe that someone or something in the distant past had the capacity to be able to resonate energy of some kind based on whatever the composition of the stone was, like whether they focused on the quartz content or the some other mineral content, to be able to not even necessarily levitate, but at least to be able to neutralize gravity, so that these things became like styrofoam blocks to be able to move them. After being there at least 100 times and 20 years of visiting, it's the only theory that I think is, though out of the box, logical. So,
Well, the current theory doesn't. It's very difficult to see that making any sense. It's like the bringing them down the hill is one thing, because gravity, it's easier to think about bringing them down the hill than it is to think about moving them across the valley and then back up all the way up the hill for me. But it's a very challenging explanation. Everything about these sites is hard to believe. So it's like, why wouldn't we consider some outside of the box thinking that could, that's equally as unbelievable as the sites themselves.
right.
Yeah. So, okay, well, good. So, in terms of the construction, I guess one of the other mysteries there is those nubs that we see. So, thoughts on the nubs?
Well, of course, yeah, you do find the so-called nubs or knobs in downtown Cusco and at a lot of the megalithic locations in Peru. The standard story by academics is that the knobs were there for lifting the stones up. So it, being able to have something protruding far enough out that you can wrap a stone underneath them, like in the picture there, lift the stone up, and then mark it, bring it back down again, remove the material you needed to, and do that several times until you have a perfect fit, which is quite a stupid idea, but that is the standard academic idea. Some people think that it could be a coded language. Other people think that they were energy points, that where energy could either go in or come out of the blocks. To this day, I honestly don't know their functions. Some think that they align to celestial objects, which some academics in Cusco have shown me at the wall, especially at the Coricacha, which was the most sacred site of the Inca in downtown Cusco. But and other people think that the knobs are there so that you could wrap the stone with a rope, and the nub or knob would restrict the movement of the rope so that it wouldn't like pop off. But to this day, I just don't know.
Have you heard of you've heard of the Ancient Architects channel?
Oh, sure.
On YouTube.
Matt.
Yeah, Matt. Yeah, Simpson does a great job, and I think he has the theory. He's proposed a theory for kind of how these blocks were placed and put together. That's based on, it's not his original theory, but it's the one that he thinks is the most likely. And I've kind of latched onto this theory of acid or some type of a red paste that was used to soften these stones. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, he's got this whole video on it on his channel, and I highly recommend it. It's about 20 minutes, I think, and it kind of talks about the possibility that a natural acid was used to soften them and to be able to put around the edges of the stone, and then the stones were placed, and then the natural weight of gravity would kind of shape the stones into place. And I mean, between this theory and hammer and chisel and geopolymer, it just feels like this theory has the best chance of being the way that they were created, for me anyway, at this point in time, based on everything that I've heard. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that theory. But then as the theory relates to the stone nubs, one idea that I had was like, if you could have put this paste onto the rocks themselves at the bottom to relieve some of that pressure as these were kind of being weighted down by gravity and shaped into place through the weight of the stone, that potentially, if that paste was a softening agent for the granite or for the limestone or whatever it was, that maybe that caused the rock to protrude out of the block itself, and that's what the stone nubs are. They're the place it's where you would have put the acid or whatever that was that could have softened it, and then the rock itself is being squeezed out of the bottom to relieve some of that pressure and to allow it to create its general shape. So that was one thing that I don't think that the stone nubs have been explained by that method. But that I thought that was something that at least should be considered by people, that look, if this, as a part of this whole acid softening theory, the stone nubs could have also been created through that softening process. So I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of all that whole topic of potentially, like, if it wasn't hammer and chisel, what was it? I know you don't think that the geopolymer explanation is valid, and we talked about that at dinner last night.
Right.
But could this softening method be a possibility? And if so, could that explain, if the rocks were able to be softened, could that explain the stone nubs? So.
Well, that is a theory that's been talked about for actually quite a long time. But, and they say that the acid comes from a plant, or a plant of some kind utilized by a certain type of bird for making depressions in stone. But I don't know how many thousands or millions of gallons of the acid you would need to do that. One of the most outrageous theories that, to some degree, I believe in, was actually thought up when I was in Cusco by a physicist called Nazca Mummies. And he believed that the technology was so, like, way beyond what we have, was so advanced that they were able to somehow cut a block of stone and then transport it in the air, and in that process the stone was turned to a soft, almost marshmallow-like material, then transported through the air and then put into the location where it was needed, and then in a flash like thousandths of a second or something like that, reconstituted itself into hard stone, and that was what was responsible for the protrusions of the stone itself. So it sounds very outlandish, but you really have to step out of the box in order to be able to even try to explain how this kind of stuff was done. Like, actually, that picture that you're looking at there, that's actually that was a modern wall in Cusco.
Right.
Recreated.
Right. Yeah, but this was pretty interesting. Yeah, go there at 1406. Right. I guess that's like a natural.
Oh, this is the natural acid?
Yeah. And it's that same color. I mean, you're familiar with when you look in the cracks and the crevices of these rocks, the people are saying it's just lichen, but it hasn't really been tested. And it's this same color that you see on the inside that you can only see if there's been like an earthquake or something and they've been separated. But it looks like it could be some type of a paste that was used, So I don't know. I just was curious if you'd done much work and if you'd looked into that theory.
I had, but I think it's much, whatever technique was used is much more exotic than something like that.
Okay. Very good. Well, yeah, I mean, one of the big things that you are researching and have kind of brought to the world has been these Paracas Skulls.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to just get a full overview from you on that project and kind of the abnormalities and things that make those kind of unique and why you think there's something there that's unexplainable.
Mm-hmm. Well, the standard timeline is that the Paracas somehow appeared on the coast of Peru about 800 BC and disappeared about 100 AD. The standard story is that there was a tribal group to the north called the Topara, and around 100 BC or so, that area was turning into a desert, so their meager farming techniques were not keeping up with the population. And they knew that to the south there was this very large population of people called the Paracas who were like geniuses at farming, because the Paracas understood that the water travels underground from the Andes to the coast. So what they would do is they would dig down about 3 feet to create all of their farming areas. So the Topara people supposedly invaded and wiped out the Paracas population and took over. The standard story of academia is that the Topara and the Paracas actually merged together and became what we call the Nazca people, which in terms of timeline is correct. But what's very curious about the Paracas is that their nobility had elongated heads. The standard population did not. And so the curious question is, where does that phenomenon come from of the elongated head? The first time I visited Paracas, my wife and I were coming back from a trip to Chile because I had to renew my visa. And rather than go all the way to Lima, we decided to stop at this little town overnight called Paracas. So we got out of the taxi and walked down the main street. And on the left-hand side was a little museum. So we went in there. It's run by a man who became my mentor, Senior Juan Navarro, and he had a large collection of Inca, Nazca, Paracas artifacts, and he had a mummified, elongated head. And I come from a somewhat pre-med background, so I studied anatomy, and the size of the head, again, mummified, was just so bizarre that I couldn't help but be shocked by what I was looking at. And he said, "Oh, you find that curious? I've got some more at home I can bring and show you." So the next morning he brought 4 or 5 more. And after that, of course, I looked up at the standard story of academia, who said that this was an example of head binding 100% of the time. and that for some reason this culture decided to bind their children's heads and carried on that tradition until they were, I think, exterminated by the Nazca people. But through careful examination and years of research, it turns out that the original Paracas elongated-headed people were born with elongated heads. I've seen quite a few examples now of like 7-month-old fetuses, 9-month-old fetuses, where the head is the size of the torso.
Wow.
So clearly that's not the result of head binding. The process normally takes between 2 and 3 years. You take a newborn baby, you start to wrap the skull, and then after 3 years, it's solid enough that you can take the binding off, and the head will maintain that shape until death. But academics refuse to look at the evidence of the fetuses that I've been talking about, or newborns that have massively elongated heads.
Do you have images of that we could take a look at now? Is there a spot online that Ryan can pull it up, or we can do that? Oh, is that one of them?
Yeah, that's one of them. The photograph to the right, you can see that the skull on the left-hand side is a normal-looking human baby, which it is. And then the one on the right, in the right-hand picture, that was actually a young child whose head was completely wrapped in textiles. And so that was in Senior Juan's collection in the Paracas History Museum. And for 2 years, I asked him, can we unwrap it? And he said, no, this belongs to the Ministry of Culture of Peru. We're not allowed to. But after a couple of years, Senior Juan got so frustrated with the fact that he'd been sending photographs of recent looting of ancient tombs in Peru, never getting a response from them, that we brought a forensic team down from California, and he decided to allow them to unwrap the baby. And the unfortunate thing that happened is that once the baby was unwrapped, some kind of acrylic spray was sprayed onto the baby's skull, turning its bright, or actually auburn red hair into a darker color like that. But when we first unwrapped the skull, it was redheaded, like genetically redheaded. That's the process right there. That's Joe Taylor unwrapping the skull. And how you found that, I'm amazed.
Oh, Ryan's a magician, yeah.
But it took him, like, he's very meticulous. It took him 6 hours to do the unwrapping. Very respectful.
Yeah, you don't want to screw that up. You've got one chance.
Yeah, you've only got one chance.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So then he unwrapped it and he found this is the skull at the end?
Yeah, unfortunately the lighting was terrible in the museum that day. I think there's still more material that was removed from it. Okay. But the hair was genetically there you go. Yeah, genetically red. Which academics, again, will say isn't the case, that had to have been some kind of dye. But that's one of the things that distinguished the Royal Paracas people, was that they were genetically redheaded. They more of an auburn red than an Irish or Scottish red. And they were taller by about 6 inches from the local indigenous population.
Because their heads were 6 inches longer.
And that too. So they averaged probably between 5'10" and 6 feet, whereas the indigenous population, even to this day, averaged like maybe 5'6".
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. So usually when you see a wrapped head, isn't it like more skinny, more narrow? But this doesn't seem to be. This doesn't look like a wrap. This looks like it's just wider all the way around, right?
Right.
So I mean, your thoughts here on this? I guess it's kind of obvious what you're thinking. Is that this leadership, the genetics that were a part of the leaders of these people were extraterrestrial in nature?
Well, we don't know. The only other elongated skulls of an equal size have been found around the Black Sea and Caspian Sea areas of Eurasia, like identical looking to the original Paracas. It's possible that there was a migration from the Black Sea and Caspian Sea, which is plausible, to the coast of Peru. Unlikely the other way around. But again, they're a complete enigma in terms of standard academia, who insists that every example of elongated skull in the world is the result of head binding. And we've proven that that's not the case. Also, genetically, the Paracas and the Inca and all of the indigenous people of Peru should be of haplogroup B in terms of their maternal genetics, and that's the indigenous haplogroup that they should be. But we did DNA testing of 25 different Paracas skulls of different ages, from about the 600 BC to about 100 AD, and 3 of them turned out to be maternally haplogroup B, but the other, I think 18 of the 25 turned out to be matching DNA, maternal DNA from this part of the world, which is very curious. That was further shown to be the case by a study actually on the TV series Ancient Aliens. So genetically, they were not indigenous originally to Peru. They came from somewhere else. Whether they were alien or not is up in the air, but the elongated skull can't be the result of, well, it's the result of genetics, but it can't be the result of evolution, because you can't have a phenomenon show up all of a sudden at 700 or 800 BC and disappear at 100 AD. Evolution takes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to happen. But in terms of the morphology of the skull, what's really curious is the original ones don't have what's called a sagittal suture, which is the line in your skull that all Homo sapiens sapiens have, running from the forehead back towards what's called the occipital plate. So that suture is there in exactly like that photograph shows. So that is completely not the case in the Paracas skull. That suture is missing. If you turn the skull upside down and shine a light inside, you'll see there's no ridge or depression or anything where that suture should be. There's just nothing. And so that is a genetic characteristic. Also, what's called the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull, that is 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch back from where it should be, because our foramen magnum is at the balance point of the skull. If it's 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch back, that means it's compensating for the elongated skull. So that's a great example of a natural elongated skull.
Right. Right.
And then there you can see the foramen magnum. If it's any farther back, it would be outside of the skull.
Right.
So that's another characteristic of the natural elongated skulls.
Sure. So with these Paracas skulls that are not, that don't appear to be naturally elongated, then, so, I mean, if it's genetic and if there's no evolution, if there's no examples of this from prior times, and it just seems to have appeared in this spot in Paracas, which is on the coast, and it's just 100 miles south of Peru, of Lima or something?
About 200, I think.
200, okay. Uh-huh. So what does that leave in terms of options then? You know, if it's not extraterrestrial is one option, I guess, right? Are there other possibilities for what could have, what can explain this?
Well, that's why it's a great mystery. And the trouble is that academics in Peru have been trying to prohibit me from doing any more real studies on the subject. They initially allowed us to do DNA testing from skulls from their collection at the Ica Museum in the city of Ica under the supervision of a Peruvian archaeologist. And when we came up with these anomalous results, we did a press conference in Los Angeles as soon as we got the results. And I waited for a month. I immediately sent the results that we got to the archaeologist in Peru, and then I waited a month for him to respond. And when he didn't respond, I literally went to his office, and I walked in and I said, "What do you think of the results?" And he said, "Well, I'm surprised." And that's all he would say. He wouldn't comment anymore about it. He didn't say, "I didn't expect this, but this is fascinating or curious." He simply said, "It's not what I suspected would be the result." Because he was convinced that they were native Peruvians of haplogroup B. So we waited for a couple of years and then contacted him again and said, "Well, would like to do some more DNA testing." And he said, "Absolutely not, because the results you got were clear contamination." And that's not the case, because the two people who did the study, my friend Eli Marzulli and an archaeologist friend of his from the U.S., they had their DNA tested, and their DNA did not match the results we were finding. So that couldn't be contamination.
So what are next steps then, do you think? I mean, or what will it take to get to the truth on this topic? What needs to happen?
Well, we're not going to be able to do any more studying or DNA testing from national collections, but the option is still open for private collections to be analyzed. So I am open to the idea. I'm not excited about doing it much anymore because I think I've done some very groundbreaking work. But if there was interest, there are private collections in Peru, especially on the coast, where we could get samples from only the natural elongated skulls, would I do DNA testing of, and do that. The other problem we had is that the mitochondrial DNA, which is the maternal, is 1,000 times more abundant than the nuclear DNA, which is the paternal father's side. So every time we've done the DNA testing, we've tried to get a nuclear result and never have been able to get it because there's so little of it. And of course, as soon as the body dies, the DNA starts breaking down. So when it's 2,000 years old, what was beautiful DNA strands are simply short, tiny little segments, if that. And there are only a few computerized machines in the world that can take that data and reassemble as to what the original DNA would have been. So I did hear, though, that, again, Nassim Harriman, who was able to get hold of two of the natural elongated skulls, he was able to get a nuclear DNA result. And there's a site or a location called GenBank in the U.S., which is a location where all of the known Homo sapiens sapiens DNA results have been stored. And so the samples he took were compared to all of the known DNA of, any ethnic or genetic, whatever group known to exist on the earth. And the results said no match. So that's where there's a slight insinuation that we're looking at some kind of alien presence. Because again, evolution can't move that quickly to suddenly produce an elongated skull. And that's why I'm no longer frustrated about this subject, but for years I was frustrated by the pushback from academia about me studying this stuff because I don't have a very specific PhD in the narrow field in which they would insist that I have to be able to do any of this work. But as we've learned, especially in recent years, all of the new discoveries that are being found in terms of ancient history in general are found by not by academics, but by independent research, such as the work you've been doing with all these beautiful vases or vases.
Right.
So that's where the future leads.
Yeah,
and that's why, all the great researchers we know like Ben van Kerkwijk and Jimmy Corsetti, and of course Graham Hancock and Christopher Dunn, on and on and on and on, are the ones who have always been in the bold position of exposing this information to the world. And all of them and I are getting more and more of a fan base because people are seeing the logic behind what we study as compared to the dogma that goes from generation to generation to generation of academics.
Right. Yep. Yeah, well said. Is there any way? Is there anything that I can do to help? If there was like interest from my standpoint to be able to collect, analyze, study one of the natural elongated skulls, would there be a way to get a hold of one legally and to be able to test and work on it? Is that something that would provide any benefit to getting to the truth of what's really going on with these skulls?
Sure.
Okay. Well, let's connect about that then at some point. Maybe after the recording, we can connect and see if there's anything that I can help out with, because I'd love to get to the bottom of this for sure.
Good. Yeah, because nobody else really wants to.
Yeah.
And yeah, probably the best lab is located at Lakehead University, which is in Ontario, Canada.
Okay.
We did DNA testing with 3 different labs: the Lakehead University in Canada, and then UCLA, and then UC Santa Cruz. And the only one that was honest with us was Lakehead University. We had some levels of corruption at one or the other, or 1 or 2 of the other labs that we were working with. In one case, they said they had results, but then they lost all their results, which is a lie.
Sounds like NASA.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, would love to help out with that if possible. And I'm finishing up the Kurt Cobain project right now, so that should be finished up within the next couple of weeks, and I'll have plenty of free time to work on something like this. So
okay, great.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. Okay, so in addition to the just the fact that these skulls seem to not be binded and they seem to be naturally elongated, and there's also the part on the top of the skull that doesn't it's not like a human skull characteristic where you've got the suture, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then are there any other anomalies that exist on these skulls?
Well, also there are 2 holes in the back of the skull which appear to be for nerve and blood flow. And again, that would be a genetic characteristic, because the size of the skull is, of the original ones, some people would say 2 or 3 times larger than human. That's not true. It's like 25 to 30% larger than Homo sapiens sapiens. But it seems that those 2 holes in the back of the skull were a genetic adaptation to the fact that the skull was maybe 30% larger and taller than normal.
Okay.
Also, the mandible, or the lower jaw, seems to be much more robust than a normal person. And as we discussed, the foramen, which is where the spinal cord enters, is 2.5 centimeters back from normal. So the unfortunate thing is it's been very difficult. People say, well, what about the rest of the skeleton? The unfortunate thing is the skulls are usually found separate from the skeleton, because up until even today, you have people who are called wakero, which are tomb robbers, will go and specifically dig up ancient graves to take the skulls in order to be able to sell them on the black market. So they're usually found separate from the skeleton, and that frustrated me again for years and years, until I went to a little tiny museum in a little village called Patapatani on the shore of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. And there's a tiny museum there, and fortunately we were able to go and find the person who had the key, because it's basically never open to the public. So he opened it up and turned on the little lights that were there, and I was able to see. I was actually there with a anatomy expert from the U.S., Ken. And so what we got to see was a full intact skeleton with an elongated head. And so then, as we were looking at that, my wife was poking me in the side saying, look at the baby, look at the baby. And I couldn't take my eyes off the skeleton, because the first time I was able to see an intact one. And then finally I looked to my left, and there was what turned out to be a 7 to 9 month old fetus, where the head was the size of the torso. And so Ken, the expert on anatomy, and I were looking at these two for quite a while. And then we drove back to our hotel in La Paz and literally said nothing on the way back. Like, we were both in so much shock what we saw. And then the next morning at breakfast, he came in and he said, I'm 90% sure that that was mother and baby, and they both died during childbirth, because they were both actually found in the same royal tomb just outside of this little town or village called Patapatani. So that I found very intriguing, that he said, I'm 90% sure that this is mother and child.
Are the eye sockets on these things normal size?
No, the eye sockets, very good point. The eye sockets are 25 to 30% larger than normal. The example you're looking at here is called Waikiki. Waikiki is in a little museum about an hour's drive outside of Cusco. And again, it's a genetic anomaly. If you can get a slightly bigger picture of Waikiki, you can see that the skull is, again, more or less the size of the torso.
Yeah.
The unfortunate thing was that the lower arms and the legs were missing, but it was found in a royal cemetery on top of a mountain by my friend Senior Renato, who's a Peruvian anthropologist. And so he was able to get hold of it and put it in his museum. The Ministry of Culture of Peru found out that he had it and then visited him and said, that's national patrimony, that belongs with us. He took them to court and he won.
Oh, good.
So he's still, he doesn't own, like you're not allowed to own an ancient person, but he's the caretaker to this very day. And Waikiki's a great example. The curious thing about that is I've had a number of American and European doctors and nurses go with me in person to look at Waikiki, and the strange anomalies are the area on top of the head that's called the fontanelle, which is the soft spot on a baby's head, is not closed. So that indicates that Waikiki would be less than 2 years old. Again,
and so the binding wouldn't have. Would the binding have been able to create something like that within 2 years of the baby's birth?
Well, there is the sagittal suture is present in Waikiki, and Waikiki was DNA tested at being 800 years old, so she would have lived at the time of the Inca. She was buried in a royal cemetery, so she was regarded as being a very special being. Her eye sockets, and we know she's her because we were able to do DNA testing of her, and it did indicate that her mother was Andean Indian. But you see the vertical elongation of the eye sockets, which is different from what we see in the Paracas. They're more like square looking. So as far as I can tell, at this point, Waikiki is a very special case. I'm sure there are many more examples of Waikiki-like beings in the National Collection of Peru, but none of them are on display. They seem to be shying away more and more in terms of showing elongated skulls and things like that in national displays for some reason, because they're inconvenient truth.
So Paracas, just back to Paracas for a second. It's right on the coast of Peru, and are there any ancient sites around there, or anything that's unique or interesting about the construction that you see in that area?
Yeah, they were major pyramid builders, but made out of adobe mud brick. But there are a few sites, one called Chongos, which is, very, probably 100-foot tall pyramids were constructed there, all solid, not like in Egypt, where there are passages going through them, but constructed over generations of, small structure, then bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So they were pyramidal builders. I like to distinguish pyramid with pyramidal in terms of, I think the original, what we call pyramids in Egypt, are true pyramids, because pyramid comes from Greek, pyromedos, which means the fire within or the fire in the middle, entertaining the idea that they were energetic structures. Whereas when we visit locations in Mexico and Central America where you see so-called pyramids, they tend to be solid and maybe weren't energetic the way that the ancient Egyptian pyramids were. So yeah, Peru has hundreds of pyramidal-looking constructions on the coast, but in general they're all made of adobe bricks because that's the material. It's not until you get into the highlands that you find hard stone. The coast is basically sand and mud. So that's what you have to work with.
Okay. What about this story? Maybe before we take a break here, the mummies, the Nazca mummies, and kind of your thoughts on some of those. There's, I guess, a few different types, and there's the tridactyls, and there's a couple of. You've got some thoughts there that we talked about last night, and was just hoping you could share your thoughts there.
Sure. Well, yeah. In 2016, I was contacted by a French archaeologist called Thierry Hamine, who lived in Cusco, and he said, I have some alien mummies if you want to look at them. So, of course, I was curious. And
no, I'm good. I'll skip.
I'm good.
Yeah.
So I decided, to go and visit him, and what he had were these very weird-looking things. The ones I was able to pick up with wearing gloves, of course, were maybe like 1.5 to 2 feet long, and like very light, totally dried out, and very alien looking. But the closer that I looked, such as that, but the closer I looked at them, the more it appeared that the joints maybe didn't work properly. And so from my initial visit, I thought these are artificial constructions, which they, I believe, turned out to be. And we know there's a man who lives in the Nazca area called Mario, who has a YouTube channel, and he has posted videos of him constructing these. So the most famous one is called Maria, and Mario made a video about Maria. Again, most people think it's an alien with 3 fingers on each hand. I was able to see an X-ray of one of the hands with the forearm, and the X-ray I sent to 2 different anatomy experts in the U.S., and thankfully they were able to respond to me, and they said these are artificial constructions because some of the bones were backwards in the hands.
Okay.
Because evolution, I think, even if you come from Alpha Centauri or if you come from Earth, there is a blueprint which is called sacred geometry, and that's how all life was designed. In your hand, you have a larger bone, and then a smaller one, and then a smaller one. And so to find some of the bones backwards showed me and the anatomist that these had been reconstructed using different bones from probably different individuals. Also, the idea with the 3 fingers, from the initial studies, it appears that what happened was that the thumb and the baby finger were cut off, and that they were added into the 3 remaining fingers to create the longer fingers. I only studied it for a short time around 2016, 2017. After that, there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of so-called evidence that they're not human, but I don't know about if that's the case or not. It's not something that I'm heavily involved in anymore. But another curious thing is that Mario made a video where he showed where he made Maria, or a Maria-like being, from 2 different mummies. So what a lot of people don't know is that a mummified body, like those of the Paracas or even Nazca people, the skin is still intact, and if you soak it in water, it'll become pliant again to some degree. So it appears what Mario did is that he took a Nazca period mummy, took the head off, and then took a Paracas period elongated head, which is just previous to Nazca, and was able to get the Paracas head onto the neck of the Nazca body, and then pull the skin enough to be able to overlap the skin of the Nazca and the Paracas. And then when it dried and desiccated, then that created, a sealed unit. And the function of the white diatomaceous earth, which you find on all of these mummies, which is a clay-like substance, I think was used to cover up where the joints are. So it is a natural material. There are probably thousands of tons of it naturally occurring in Nazca. But I'm going to be doing a tour in Peru in November, and we're going to be able, with our group, to go to the Museum of Ica, where they have 3 to 5 of these specimens. And so that's the first time I'm going to be able to physically see the Maria mummy and some of the others. So I'll be able to give you an update about that after November. At the moment, the jury's out on this. The National Ministry of Culture in Peru says that they claim that every example of this is the result of fakery, that different body parts have been taken from different individuals to make up these fantastical looking beings. 100% they say, but to me the jury is out. I don't know, but I will learn more in November.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate that. Oh yeah, this is the Jesse Michaels one. I guess this was a pretty popular episode that he dropped a couple of weeks back. But yeah, this one was kind of interesting. I felt like, I don't know how familiar you are with that one, but
well, yeah, the fetal position is a normal burial practice in ancient cultures in Peru, so that's not suspicious. But the white diatomaceous earth that cover these bodies is not a natural material used by any culture I know of in the past. So I think to some degree it's used to disguise evidence of assembling parts together.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, well, good. How you feeling? You want to take a little break and come back? Yeah, let's do it. Good. That's a great start. I appreciate it. Good stuff. All right, cool. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
You ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. So I guess one thing that I wanted to kick off the podcast with that I didn't mention was that you're not doing many podcasts these days. I looked up to try to find some stuff to watch in the last couple of days to do a little bit of preparation for the podcast, but you haven't done a lot of sit-down podcasts with people. So in the last 4 or 5 years anyway, it doesn't seem like. So is that intentional, I guess? And I guess question 1 and then question 2, what got you interested in doing this podcast?
Well, I've done a lot of podcasts, and as far as I can tell, all the big ones except Joe Rogan. People for years have been saying you should be on Joe Rogan. I keep saying, well, why don't you contact him and see? Nothing so far. And then I did so many of them that it started to get repetitive. And then, smaller podcasters would contact me and say, it would really grow my channel if you were on. I did that for a while. Then I got kind of tired of doing it, so I just pulled back, and that's more or less the reasoning behind it. And yours, because, well, as I said, I've been watching your show and very impressed with your approach. You're very soft-spoken, thoughtful. You allow people to complete sentences without interrupting them. And, so it's an honor to be here in person and do this.
Cool. I appreciate that. Appreciate that very much. It's an honor to have you here once again. So thank you. Good. Okay. Well, that was an excellent first half of the conversation, and we'll finish up with maybe some other topics. Then just go until we're finished. But that was kind of South America. and fascinating stuff in there. So thank you for sharing all your knowledge with us. And then, I guess kind of like you mentioned early on that South America and a lot of those polygonal walls were kind of the right brain, the more artistic kind of stuff, and then the left brain, maybe Egypt. There's some more like straight lines and things are carved just in a different kind of a way. They're more scientific, less artistic in some ways. So, in what place within Egypt would you want to kind of start the back half of the conversation and get into what's the most fascinating part of Egypt for you at this point?
I think the Serapeum at Saqqara, a series of 2 underground tunnels with these massive boxes, some estimate as much as 100 tons apiece, strategically positioned inside their own niches. The stone, some believe, comes from Aswan, but my geologist friend Susan Moore thinks that the stone comes from Sinai in the Eastern Desert. So somehow they're transporting these giant blocks of stone across the desert. No use of the Nile, because that's to the south. That's the only one that's actually open that you can actually go down and inspect in person, which is great. And what they know, I think there are 25 of them that are in their niches, and 2 which never made it to the niches, like partially made, and then some event happened that seems to have stopped their being completed. So supposedly the lid of that's about 30 tons, the box is about 70 tons. If you're very lucky, the one on the right, that's one of the ones that's still stuck in the hallway that never made it. The lid is behind it. And so if you're very fortunate and you offer a little bribe called bakshish, they'll let you actually go inside the box itself.
Wow.
And it resonates to the sound of Om. The same with the King's Chamber and the Great Pyramid. That seems to be something that you find at a lot of megalithic sites, that Om is the sound that is pleasing to the box and these other places, so that it will literally vibrate and increase the volume of the sound a lot from normal. And the corners inside look like they would be perfectly sharp 90-degree angles, but there's actually a little curve at each corner. And according to people I've talked to, the function of the curve is so that sound and energy can move around the inside, because if you have sharp corners, it's not, the sound or energy won't have a tendency of wanting to move around in a circle. But if you have a little corner like that, and perfectly machined, you put your finger down the corner, and it's obviously done by some kind of it's not hand done, it's done by some kind of router, because it's totally uniform all the way from the top to the bottom. And the etching, so-called hieroglyphics on the surface, standard academia insists that was done by the same people who did the boxes, but that's ridiculous. The hieroglyphs look like they were done by an 8-year-old child with a nail scratching the surface. And the boxes themselves, as I said, the stone was moved hundreds of miles from either the Sinai or Aswan. The box and the lid are always cut from the same piece of stone. So there's an example in the Cairo Museum where you can see one was partially completed. They were trying to cut the lid, which is actually the bottom of the box, but whatever machine was used, it appears to have been 2 circular saws about 6 feet in diameter, cutting one up and one down. And then there's a line that was actually etched into the surface on top of the box. And for some reason, the saws went, that's it. The saws. Ryan, you're amazing at what you can find.
He is.
So for some reason, there was a vibration that started to be set up when these saws were cutting off course and snapped that part of the lid off. And rather than recycling the stone for something else, the ancient builders simply abandoned the project, which you find over and over again in Egypt, including the unfinished obelisk at Aswan that would have weighed 1,200 tons. So for some reason, they weren't like us today, if you're trying to cut something big and it doesn't work out the way you want it, we would cut pieces off and recycle it for other reasons. But for some reason, whoever these ancient builders were, they just would simply abandon the project and move on and do something else.
Somebody probably got in trouble for that mistake. So that's the bottom of the box right there. But what you're saying is that became the lid of the box. Yeah. And so that angle there was cut at too sharp of an angle, and so they had to abandon it.
Yeah, it's starting to move like into the box itself to the right. That would have set up a vibration, destabilizing the blades, causing that part of the lid to just snap right off.
And that looks like Aswan granite right there, right?
It does. Yeah, that looks like Aswan granite.
I've got a few vases that are made out of Aswan granite, and they're some of the more precise ones that I have. And so, yeah, that's that same color scheme out of there. But then, so then those would have come, that granite would have come from Aswan or from potentially the Sinai Desert. Can we pull up a map on, Ryan? Can we pull up a map on where that would have been in the desert? Because I haven't actually seen that, to see that other location and how far that is from the Serapeum. What would he type in to find that?
I don't know, because the only information I have from that is actually from my geologist friend, Susan Moore. She's seen samples of stone from the Sinai and from Aswan, and she can differentiate between one and the other in terms of where the stone came from.
Okay.
So I would think at least 200 miles to the east of the Serapeum.
Okay. Got it. And then you mentioned the corners were rounded off. And so would those have been drilled from the top down in order to start the hollowing out process? And is that why? I know they're rounded in addition to be able to carry a frequency and sound and have it vibrate. But in terms of the manufacturing process, would those have been tube drilled down to the bottom? Or do you think it was a different method?
It seems to be more like a router.
Okay.
So the problem with the Serapeum boxes is Chris Dunn, who we've talked about, he contacted, I think, 4 or 5 granite manufacturers in the U.S. He sent them a photograph of one of the boxes. And he said, price is no problem. I'll pay anything if you can manufacture one of these. And he got one reply back, and the reply was, only if we can make it out of 6 pieces of stone.
Right.
We can't do it out of 1. We don't have the technology to core drill something of that size with any kind of precision. So that indicates again that even in the 21st century, we can't manufacture what was done in Egypt a long time ago.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery. And they're different types of stones too, right? There's basalt. Wasn't that dark one with all the chicken scratch on it was basalt?
Actually, I think that's diorite.
Is it?
Yeah, okay. There's diorite, granite, granodiorite, which are all types of granite. 1 or 2 which are limestone, which could very well have been done during the dynastic times, much smaller. But yeah, they all appear to be types of granite in that case.
So what is the smoking gun evidence for you in Egypt of ancient construction? I mean, these boxes, what else do you think goes back to Younger Dryas, to prior to the Younger Dryas?
Well, there are other things like the Osiris shaft located on the Giza Plateau, which is only open to the public 5 or 6 years ago. Your group will pay something like $3,500 for 2 hours. You can go down almost 200 feet into the Giza Plateau, down 3 levels. There are rickety ladders that help take you down, but those appear to be super ancient. When you reach the bottom, it's a pool of water with likely a 40 or 50 ton box in the middle of it, and indications that there are horizontal tunnels that go through and possibly connect up with tunnels that enter the Sphinx, but those have all been filled in and blocked off, which is typical in Egypt. That box that we were just looking at, or that one, is actually made of a stone called dacite, which is volcanic, but it's not indigenous to Egypt. Some speculate that it came from Turkey. So it shows you how far afield they would go to get the material that they wanted. And we do have evidence, and even Zahi Hawass will admit that we've explored officially about 15% of ancient pre-dynastic Egypt, that the other 85% is underground, not buried in the sand, in the bedrock. So a lot of evidence of there being tunnels. Abdel Hakim Awian, who we talked about a little bit before the show, he was the last of the great wisdom keepers, oral tradition experts of ancient Egypt, who died just before I got to go and meet him. But the story he told is that he found a vertical shaft at Saqqara that was open, and he descended down into the shaft to the bottom, and he was able to crawl, walk, and swim all the way to the Giza Plateau, where he emerged back out. When he was in his teens, he died in his, I think, late 70s. And so that's, firsthand information that this tunnel system exists, which may be hundreds of miles, north, south, east, and west. And I think about 7 years ago or so, I went with our group to Saqqara, to the location where the vertical shaft was, and it was covered in concrete or filled in. So the officials found out that Hakim had been able to do this, and
wow,
they covered up the evidence.
Jeez, it's crazy. What do you think they're hiding?
Well, actually, the good thing about Egypt is, it's, as far as I can tell, it's the only country that has ancient megalithic stuff that is actually expanding what the public can see. Because, as I've said, the Osiris shaft was closed for a long time. Maybe with special permission you'd be able to go into it, but now it's open for a fee. The step pyramid at Saqqara was under repair for years and years and years, and then in the last 3 or 4 years, you can pay a special fee and go 6 or 7 stories underground into the very bottom layer of what it is. So Egypt's good that way because they have a new director of antiquities. Places like Peru and Bolivia are getting more and more restrictive, putting up more and more ropes around the more interesting aspects of the locations, like Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu, when I first went there 20 years ago, you could go anywhere and you could spend all day there. Like until, I think they close at 5 o'clock. But then over the course of time, they've been making it more and more restrictive. And now, the last time I went, there are 3 routes you can take. You can only go for half a day maximum. And there's only one route you can do where you can go up to the lookout point, look down on the city, walk down through the megalithic core, around the outside of it, and then back out again. The other 2 routes are you just simply get to go to the lookout point, and then you're forced to leave. So that's unfortunate. Puma Punku's totally wrapped in, roped off right now. It has been since some Russians did some excavating. So these places are becoming more and more restrictive to the public, which is unfortunate, but that's why I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to see all this stuff when it was open.
Yeah, why do you think that, like, sticking with the underground stuff in Egypt, but then even around the world, I mean, in Turkey and it's in South America, but sticking to Egypt, I mean, why do you think all of these underground tunnels in the bedrock exist? And, I mean, it's clearly there, and now there's all this ground penetrating radar that's showing all these sites. And I mean, I think it's becoming more and more common knowledge that there's this vast network of tunnels that exist underground. What do you think that was for? What do you think the purpose of that was?
I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I just know there is an extensive network. One of the first trips I took to Egypt, on the last day, our group had left to go home, and so I told my friend Yusuf Awian that I was going to go up on the plateau. And he said, "Oh, I'll come with you." And he grew up across the street from the Sphinx. So we went up there, and then we walked over and stepped over a rope that was there, which you're not supposed to do. But we walked up to a guardhouse, and the guards came out. They knew Yusuf since he was a little boy, and shook his hand, gave him a cup of tea. And then we walked through the back of the guardhouse and proceeded down a ramp. And then we went 4 stories underground. And very crudely cut, like it looked like it was machine cut, but very crudely cut into the bedrock. And then he said, do you want to keep going? And I looked at my watch and I said, we're pretty close to closing time. I'd like to, but I don't think so. But that's, personal evidence of experiencing the part of the tunnel system. But there are other stories that say that the tunnels go all the way from the plateau to Karnak, which is quite a distance. So we'll see over the course of time how much more will get opened up. Every time I go to Egypt, there's something that I've wanted to see that I haven't been allowed to, that all of a sudden, for a fee, you're allowed to explore. So that's why I'm very happy to go once a year.
Next time you're given that opportunity, keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So underground then in Egypt, what about, so there's Hawara, right? That's now, I think Ben Van Kerkwijk just did a presentation at the Cosmic Summit that opened a lot of people's eyes to this underground structure that's been described by Herodotus and all these ancient Greek people as exceeding the Great Pyramid in its magnificence. And now there's these scans that kind of show where it is. And I guess there was a canal that was, a dam that was built, and now this whole place is apparently flooded with water, and it's going to be difficult to get to unless the water is kind of redirected, and then mass excavations begin. You're familiar with this area and this story?
Yeah, I've been there once. They say, as you said, ancient scholars around the 0 AD were able to access it, and it appears to be a massive labyrinth system, much larger than the Great Pyramid, underground. And it's the surface level of water, I think, is within 10 feet of the surface or 15 feet of the surface now. So you're able to access one of the entrances to a pyramid that is there, but you can only walk down like 15 or 20 feet, and then you hit the water table.
Right.
Yeah, there we are. Ryan, you're amazing. And so whether, if the ancients said that there is a labyrinth, I believe it, but whether there ever will be access to it except by scuba divers,
right,
I don't know. But, it's one of the many mysteries. And yeah, as you said, Ben recently did a video about this, and I'm just so happy that I'm able to see more and more of what was denied in the past. Yeah, there's the entrance right there.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah, this place needs to be excavated. I mean, just the simple fact of how it was described by the ancient people and by the Greeks is like, I mean, if it seems like that they've got and this was discovered and known about since I think the early 2000s, maybe 2008 or so, by Hawass and the Egyptians, and found and discovered. And then they're like, well, it's too expensive to do anything to redirect the water, to do anything about this canal. So we're just going to ignore it, is kind of the story. We're just going to pretend like we never found this. So that needs to, and I mean, the water could be damaging the stuff, the entire site. It is damaging the entire site, undoubtedly. So it seems like there needs to be more people talking about this, and that needs to get on more people's radar so that it can become public knowledge, and so that people around the world have some interest in getting something done about this place and preserving it.
Yeah, that would be good. The amount of money it would take to pump the water out would be astronomical. And the Department of Antiquities has somewhat limited resources. And of course, people say, well, why doesn't a billionaire come and do it? I don't know. But Egypt is much more complicated than what most people think.
Yes. So and then what about that that site then, or I guess the the pyramid team, the Italian team that did the scans of the underground below the pyramid, and have supposedly found, 2-kilometer tall structures beneath the pyramid. We spoke at dinner a bit on this last night. You're not convinced about this. What are your thoughts there?
Well, the results are very preliminary. I'm going to wait until there's a peer-reviewed paper written about it. The scans themselves look like they were taken from a satellite. I don't think the SAR system they were using can properly penetrate the surface. I mean, ground-penetrating radar can, but that's on the surface itself. So I'm open-minded about it, but the results that I've seen so far, I don't find very convincing. The images, as you can see, are pretty crude, like the lower left.
Yeah.
And then what they're extrapolating using AI on the upper left, of these giant things going down through the bedrock, through the water table, hundreds and hundreds of meters down. I think they're going from 1% evidence to 100% without going through any really solid evidence as of yet.
Yep. Interesting. All right. So then on to the vases in Egypt, as long as we're in Egypt. What was your, just walking into this room and checking all these out and handling them, what were your thoughts on these vases? Have you been able to handle any prior to this experience today?
I've been able to touch some in the British Museum and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but I've never held one in my hands, and you have 90 plus of them in this room. They're all incredible. The ones that I was looking at and fascinated by obviously were done using very advanced technology. They were not done using a piece of wood with a hunk of flint somehow glued to it. And then, of course, the ones with the handles couldn't have been done on a lathe because you would break the handles off. So the only technology we seem to have is called a CNC machine, which is a computerized cutting technology. I think 5-axis or something like that can go in and do astonishingly detailed cutting of them. So, yeah, I'm blown away to be able to see them in person. You even have some made out of lapis lazuli, which comes from Afghanistan. So that's clearly indicating an extensive trading system in the distant past. They could not have been made by the dynastic people. There are examples of alabaster ones that could have and were made by dynastic craftsmen, but some of these, show astonishing levels of precision within thousandths of an inch tolerance. And so, they are a clear indication of a very advanced technical civilization before the dynastic time period. Some of them were found in tombs as much as, according to Ben van Kerkwijk, 10,000, 12,000 years old, which is long before dynastic Egypt. So some of them clearly appear to be at least 12,000 years old, which is twice as old as most academics believe civilization has existed. So incredible anomalies, but evidence of very advanced technology.
Yeah, what would you say to people? So having seen and felt and picked these up and been able to examine these and see the age that exists on most of them, many of them, what would you say to people who say that these are modern recreations?
Well, you can tell simply with the patina, which is the surface texture, surface color, that they're very, very old. If they were new, they'd all be bright and shiny and perfectly polished, and most of them aren't. They're in different stages of completion. I can see some that were brought to 100% completion in terms of polish and thinness. Others appear to be like 90% finished, 80% finished. The largest cache of them that I know about is under the Step Pyramid at Saqqara in Egypt, and there are still thousands and thousands and thousands of broken pieces of them that are stuffed in this one little chamber on one of the lower levels. Some estimates are at least 50,000 pieces of these were found in that location by itself. They're in private collections, such as what you have here, and in museums and other private collections around the world. So I think just based on the patina themselves, you can tell that they're very, very ancient, and by the level of craftsmanship, had to have been done using advanced machining.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There's some technology or some method of manufacturing that is just not explained by the modern mainstream explanation for how these were made. There's something missing from the archaeological record in order to explain these, whether it's a lathe or multiple different types of technology or machining. There's something that's not there that we just don't have.
Yeah, and that's why some academics, like from Egypt, scoff at the idea of an ancient civilization because they say, "Where's an example of a pot shard or piece of pottery from that time period? What about 50,000 of these stone vessels that have been found?"
Right.
So.
Yeah. To look at these earlier with you before we started recording was pretty cool, and to see kind of your astonishment at them and to be able to observe. It's always fun to watch somebody who hasn't seen them before, who comes in and looks at all of them at the same time, and the astonishment and the amazement of them is a special moment. There was one that you asked about last night. You asked if you'd be able to examine the thin wall artifact that we have that's been featured a lot on Ben has talked about it and whatnot. I wanted to show you that one, but I wanted to show it to you on camera, and to allow you to kind of take a look at it and chat about it on camera. So here's that one. And don't drop it.
Nope. Wow, you can see the light coming right through it.
Yeah.
How thick is it?
2 millimeters.
2 millimeters.
2 millimeters. At the wall on the center, it's 2 millimeters thick. Throughout most of it, it's between 3 and 4 millimeters, but at its thinnest point, which is a band all the way around the center, about 1.5 inches high, is 2 millimeters.
Huh.
Yeah, about 1.9, I think.
Wow. Yeah, you can still see the machining marks inside, parallel grooves.
It looks like the tool maybe slipped at the top there at some point as it was hollowing the inside out. Yeah, there's some tool marks in there.
And the outside is very nicely polished.
Very nicely polished, yeah.
And then the two protrusions, drilled hole exactly in the center.
Yeah.
Well, that's astonishing. Now, there's no way you can do this by hand. Of course, there's some Russian researchers who have been trying to replicate these, and they've done, I would say, an okay job, taking a lot of time trying to replicate these, but never on this kind of level of accuracy.
Right.
So, job well done, but not like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Russians, in terms of circularity and roundness, they're getting about 50 to 81 thousandths of an inch deviation from perfect circularity. Most of the ones in this collection are between 10 and 25 thousandths of an inch, so 2 to 3 times greater circularity. Mm-hmm. And most of the ones that we've scanned in the Petrie Museum are in that same range of 10 to 25 thousandths of an inch deviation from perfect roundness. But then there's this more precise class that is between 2 thousandths of an inch up to 5 or 6 thousandths of an inch. That's one of them that is just incredibly perfectly round and perfectly symmetric. And I mean, there's a couple that have measurements, 0.4 ten thousandths of an inch, or 0.4 thousandths of a millimeter deviation between the X and the Y axis on various points of it. So, the perfection and the symmetry on these, the concentricity in many cases is just incredible. It's just perfect. Yeah. So there's something we don't understand. There's some tool that was used that we don't quite get.
Yeah.
But definitely turned, definitely spun, definitely carved with some sort of a tool on the outside. The internal part of it was definitely hollowed out with a tube drill or some type of a drill to hollow out the inside. And then the walls were thinned out as it was being spun and cut. And then how did they do the material between the handles? Was it kind of, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, as opposed to full spins?
Right.
Possibly. Yeah, they're fascinating, man. Crazy.
Yeah, and that's like what Ben pointed out in a recent interview, I think on your channel, is that granite is not homogeneous. It's composed of different minerals, and so you have harder and softer and harder and softer. And whatever tool was doing this didn't care the hardness of the material. It just consistently was able to remove material in a very sophisticated and accurate manner.
Right.
Which is mind-boggling. Of course, you go to Egypt and you can see vessels made out of alabaster that you can actually buy around the Giza Plateau, but they're a lot thicker, and alabaster is a lot softer material than what this is. And as we've discussed, there are even some, you've got at least one made out of quartz crystal. How in God's name would you do that?
Right.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'm honored.
Yeah. And then, the question comes up. Whenever I talk about the walls in South America or even the vases, there's always comments about geopolymer. These were poured. These are cast, not carved. And do you want to? I mean, when you look at something like this, I think it's blatantly obvious that there's no chance that this was poured. For a variety of reasons. But can you comment on geopolymer theory as it relates to the walls and potentially the vases that you've seen here?
Sure. I don't believe that any of this is geopolymer. I think Davidowitz was the one who first speculated that the Great Pyramid, 2.5 million multi-ton blocks, that each one was actually poured into a mold. The problem is you would need very refined technology to be able to grind the limestone of the pyramid stones up into a powder that would be the consistency of flour to be able to get it to bond to itself. And then there's the problem of the forms. You have 2.5 million multi-ton blocks of the Great Pyramid by itself. So that means 2.5 million different forms would have to be created. In modern times, we have 1/8-inch plywood you can use that you can even bend in order to create shapes where you can pour a concrete or geopolymer mix into in order to fill a reservoir like that. But we know where the stone was quarried from. And so I just don't believe that. The latest speculation is about Pumapunku, that those stones, especially that the gray andesite, was poured into molds. Again, what would they make the molds out of when there are no indigenous trees that grow at 12,500 feet above sea level? Samples have been taken from the quarry and also from the site itself, and they match perfectly one with the other in terms of composition. So I don't believe in the geopolymer theory as regards megalithic stuff.
And then there's a few sites that are interesting that, like Petra, maybe. Maybe we go there. Ryan, can you pull up some pictures of that? There's some people will say that Petra is geopolymer as well, and or that it's been 3D printed or something. I got that from who was that? Courtney Brown. He's a guy who says he remote views and that he was able to go back and see UFOs 3D printing this site, which doesn't make any sense at all. It's not a 3D printing. You're building layers from the bottom up. This was clearly carved out of a rock, that from the top down. So But can you talk to us a little bit about Petra and that site? I think when most people look at it, they think about that that spot from the Indiana Jones movie. But this is a massive site, right?
Yeah, well, most people are acquainted with what's called the Treasury, which is what that location is, because it was in Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
But I've been there twice, and Petra is 7 miles or 12 kilometers long. First, you walk through what's called the Seek, which is the entrance, which is this channel that was cut into the bedrock. On the western surfaces, we see like blackening of the stone, which I think was the result of some kind of solar outburst or some kind of technology that was literally cooking the surface of the western sides of the different structures. The Treasury represents less than 1% of Petra in itself, and about a 20-minute drive away from Petra is what's called Little Petra, which is a continuation of Petra. So it's a massive complex cut out of the bedrock. You can see the machining marks on the surfaces. It appears there were 3 different tools used at about a 45-degree angle. There's a rougher one cutting down at an angle, then a finer one, and then like a finishing tool. And so clear evidence of ancient technology, not a bunch of, of guys with copper chisels chipping away to try to do it. It was clearly machined surfaces. And the other interesting thing that relates to ancient Egypt is the vertical surfaces near the top of all of these indentations at Petra have what's called a bullnose on the top, which is a rounded surface. That's also something that you find in Egypt. So it's my belief that whoever the megalithic builders were who did Egypt were also responsible for Petra and some recently advertised sites in Saudi Arabia as well that have a very similar look. So you can also tell by the weathering, like thousands of years of weathering of the surfaces.
Right.
The standard story is that some people called the Nabateans show up around 200 BC. They are literally Arabic people on camels that show up, and that they were the ones responsible for building the entire complex. But it seems self-evident to me that they discovered a giant abandoned complex, and then they occupied it, utilized it, used it as a way for storing water, because there were like a lot of water used to pour through Petra in the past. And so during the time of the Nabateans, they were able to set up walls and dams to be able to trap water and then sell that to different people from really quite great distances. So I think the Nabateans were ones who found it around 2,000 years ago, but it was made by somebody else several thousand years before that.
So this is not very far from Egypt.
Not that far. It's about a 2-hour flight.
So maybe a couple of 100 miles, 400 miles, 500, something like that, probably.
Yeah, something like that. So it's not a great distance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and your thought is that it was probably made by the same people that constructed the megalithic work that we see in Egypt.
At least some of it. I think the vertical surfaces in Egypt and the vertical surfaces we see at Petra were done by the same people. Yeah.
So Aswan to Giza is farther than Giza to Petra.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah. So very easily. I mean, and it's basically the same line of latitude.
Right.
Okay. So, I mean, how do you think they did it? How do you think it was just like how do you think they did it? What do you think the technology was to be able to turn the mountain into a city?
I think it was like cutting machines. And I think it was like a row of cutters, maybe 5, 6, 10 or something like that were interconnected. And then, at least for the finishing process, again, the marks we see are at a 45-degree angle coming down like that. And there are a bunch of really big chambers. There's one chamber there which is 300,000 cubic feet in size.
Wow.
Of cut out of the bedrock. Of course, the material that was cut out isn't there anymore because that was a long time ago. The actual technology for hollowing out these chambers, I don't know what it was, some kind of cutting technology, but we see what's left behind of the finishing technology, these horizontal scraping or cutting marks into the surface by at least a few millimeters, if not deeper than that.
What about the Bar caves?
Oh.
You think it's related?
No, I think that's different. I think that's different. That's
Okay.
in India. India has incredible megalithic stuff that I haven't been able to go to physically myself yet. But the Bar caves, if people want to look those up, I mean,
Mind-boggling.
my God,
Yeah.
like mirror surfaces inside, a vaulted there, that vaulted ceiling like that. There are some inscriptions as you walk into it on the wall, but clearly that was done, by the Hinduistic people, or, ancient Indians did that. But the actual machining of those surfaces was done using very highly advanced technology. There's a relatively recent documentary done called BAM, B-A-M, where they went in and they measured the surfaces, and the level of sophistication and accuracy is just mind-blowing. So that's one I still, India's a country I would like to go to once and see before I shuffle off the mortal coil. But
Same.
it's, there's the Elephanta caves and just all sorts of stuff that would well be worth having a good look at.
And then are you familiar with what Matt LaCroix is doing? And I think Robert Schock is a part of that team as well, who I know you know. But at Lake Van in Turkey, and diving into Lake Van and exploring those ancient ruins?
Yeah, Matt's found some megalithic works in Turkey around Lake Van, and I was actually going to be part of that team, but our schedules got conflicted, and so I wasn't able to go with them. But yeah, what I see from what he's filmed is there are remnants of megalithic constructions, in some cases with inferior work on top. I wouldn't say there's a lot of evidence, but there is some evidence of advanced machining technology in that part of Turkey. There are other locations in Turkey that are also incredibly fascinating. A lot of people will have heard of Göbekli Tepe, which I've been to. I don't think I'd go back because I was impressed by the scale of it, but not by the level of finishing work. It seems to have been done, as far as I'm concerned, with hand tools. So I'm glad I went, because you don't, as again we've stated, you don't know about these places until you've actually physically been there. It's one thing to watch a video, but when you're there, you can look in detail and see if there is evidence of machining technology. But there are all sorts of other sites in Turkey that are very curious. There's a location called the Titus Tunnel, which is cut into the limestone bedrock. It goes on for half a mile, and it's got a ceiling that's probably 50 feet off the floor. We had a local guide with us in Turkey who insisted that the Romans did it using hand tools, and it's like, no, it's another one of those things. The Romans found it, renamed it after Titus, but there it is right there, and it's just, huge. And so that, that's another example, I think, of where ancient technology was employed to do that kind of work.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so in terms of all those ancient sites in that part of the world, then when you've got Egypt, you've got some of the stuff in Turkey, you've got Petra, and all within geographically not too far of a distance apart. What's your idea in terms of the dating on those? Just pre Younger Dryas, I guess, on a lot of these ancient sites that show signs of advanced machining and advanced tooling and whatnot. Tough to tell I guess much beyond that, much beyond that they're older than the Younger Dryas. But that's basically, and you think it was probably primarily the same group of people for that part of the world that was responsible for constructing those specific sites?
Well, I think aspects of Egypt, Petra, Little Petra, some sites in Saudi Arabia look like they were done by the same technology. The stuff I've seen in Turkey is a lot cruder, but huge in scale. Like I mentioned the Titus Tunnel, also the underground cities. Some people will be acquainted with what's called Derinkuyu,
Yep.
which is a location you're allowed to go 10 floors underground. They say it goes 20 floors underground. It could go much deeper than that. I don't know, but it's a very hard type of limestone. So I tried to scratch it with my thumbnail. It was impossible. So very heavily weathered. I think that was done with some kind of advanced technology too. But there are between 250 and 400 underground complexes. I wouldn't call them cities, but complexes in Turkey. Some of them are connected by tunnels, cut into the bedrock. So very mysterious. Could have been used as places of refuge 2,000 or 3,000 years ago for the local population to escape invaders, but they were not done by those people. They were simply there, inherited. Use was different, as we see in Egypt or Peru or any of these places. We find these sites at least 13,000 years old that later were used for different functions by successive cultures that, developed and occupied the area.
Yeah. All right, excellent. No, I appreciate that. You just kind of summarizing that, and you've probably said it a couple of times, but I wanted to make sure that it was abundantly clear prior to moving on, just what your thoughts were on that specific. Sure. Yeah. So I mean, and then in terms of the last couple of topics that I wanted to cover with you, we talked a little bit at dinner last night about giants and your thoughts there, and the possibility that maybe. I mentioned the Denisovans and the skulls, the skull that's been found, the pinky bone, the molar, and just the fact that these are massively bigger than that even modern human bones, and so they're trying to be fit in now to the story and make everything just boring and just have everything be completely non-interesting and just say, oh yeah, it was just their heads that were, their heads and their were just much larger, kind of like Neanderthal, except even bigger than Neanderthal. But I feel like it's at least possible that Denisovans were taller and were larger than 5'6" or whatever everybody's saying that they are, with a skull that's 50% larger than a modern human skull. That if you scale that up and if you apply just human bones and you're scaling up the human bones to fit these Denisovan bones, you get something that's about 8 feet tall, 7 to 8 feet tall, 7.5 to 8.5 feet tall. So I think it's an interesting thing to kind of keep our minds open to the possibility that maybe all of these stories from Spanish chroniclers in South America and the biblical stories and just all of these stories about giants, possibly Denisovan, possibly some race of a hominoid that just hasn't been fully discovered yet. I mean, the bones that we have found of ancient humans and ancient human ancestors are so small, it's so few fragments that they could be fit onto a billiard table. And I don't think, most people don't recognize that or realize that, but only 3 Denisovan remains have been found thus far. So I thought that was kind of an interesting possibility. And, I know we talked about giants that were much bigger than that, and people are kind of, talk about some of these pictures that are clear forgeries that have been found of these skulls that are, 5-6 feet long, and the giant would have been 25 feet tall. I think we can pretty much dismiss that. But your thoughts on a cousin species, whether it's Denisovan or not, that could have been a much larger species of hominoid than we've found thus far.
Yeah, well, I prefer the term large human than I do the term giant, because I think it's very plausible that there could have been ancient humans or humanoids that were 8 feet, possibly 9 feet tall. But the problem with any bigger is that as you scale up, the density and the size of the bones increase dramatically. So if you're talking about somebody being 25 feet tall, then the proportions of their body and bones would just go way out of whack. So, I've heard speculations of that. The problem is I want to see the physical evidence. I've seen a lot of accounts from newspapers from the late 19th, early 20th century that talk about, they found 9-foot skeletons or 10-foot skeletons, sometimes with photographs, but I've never seen the actual bones themselves, which is problematic. So I think that's the smoking gun that is missing are the artifacts. I know of museums where I have been told they had large femur bones, which is the largest bone in the leg, on display. And then, of course, when I wanted to go a few years later, mysteriously they're gone. So whether they ever existed or not, I don't know, because I haven't been able to see one or pick one up. And then I've seen photographs of copies of femurs that were very massive. But again, a copy is not the femur itself. You can easily fabricate something of a larger scale. But until I see the actual physical evidence, I have no incredible interest in studying giants. I respect those that do. People like Hugh Newman, for example, has done a lot of work in this area, and so I respect what he has been and is doing. But for myself, that's just one of those things. It's like when people talk about things like the Anunnaki, I don't cover some of these topics because I like to focus my energy on megalithic sites. I prefer to be an expert in a narrow field than know little bits about everything, which, there are some great researchers who do that. They know little bits about every possible angle that you can go after. But for myself, I like to focus on the skull, the elongated skull phenomenon, and the megalithic stuff.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. And I totally agree with you on that. The big bone stuff, the huge human stuff, and there has been stories on that and stuff from 100 years ago on newspaper articles, and everybody to that phenomenon says, "Show me the bones. Where are the bones? I've never seen a bone." And that's kind of the argument, and that's totally legitimate in this case because nobody's ever seen a giant. But that same logic is used on the UFO phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, show me the aliens. Show me the extraterrestrials. Show me the spacecraft. And it's like you can't really use that argument on the UFO phenomenon as much because there are millions of people who have seen the phenomenon. And there are now there's whistleblowers that are coming out that have worked in the government. Now, whether all these people are lying, and it's a big hoax and it's a big psyop, and that's really the only other possibility for that phenomenon. But it's the show me the bones works, but I feel like the show me the aliens doesn't work just because there's been so many people that have seen and interacted with the phenomenon, including myself. I've seen a massive black triangle in the sky, and my wife was there, and a friend of ours was there with a glowing orange orb in the center of it, typical like you would see from I think Ashton Forbes just did a video on this, and it's like TR3B or something. I guess it's like a Lockheed Martin. I saw one of those in 2024, and I don't know if it was alien or if it was reverse engineered or what it was, but it was massive. I mean, the thing was the size of 2 football fields, and it was flying at 8,000 feet, and it didn't make a sound, and it was just kind of just cruising. And I mean, I'm one of millions of people who have seen stuff like this. So I think to hand wave away that phenomenon is it just doesn't fit into the reality that you've created from your beliefs. And so you're not trusting the experiencers, the people who have actually seen something. I think anytime we stop listening to the experiencers, we're losing touch with reality to kind of try to hold on to a reality that we've created in our own minds through our beliefs. In this case, it's a negative belief. There are no crafts or anything interesting happening in the skies or anything different than what can be readily explained. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe I'd use that as a segue to get into a little bit and to potentially close off with a little bit about the maybe Mars or the moon or the UFO phenomenon in general. I mean, why don't we just start with the UAP phenomenon in totality? And what are your thoughts on what people are seeing and experiencing, and our pilots and military personnel and these whistleblowers coming out? I mean, do you think that some of this is related to some of these ancient megalithic structures? Do you think that what people are reporting is real? Do you think that it's a psyop? Do you think that all these people are hallucinating? Like, what do you think is really happening as it relates to the modern day UAP phenomenon?
Well, I think anybody who says UFOs don't exist have never seen one. So it's easy to discount something you've never experienced. You have, I have. And so when you experience something like that, I've had quite a few UFO encounters. I still prefer that old term to UAP, but and so every time I've had an experience, I've always had this feeling in my solar plexus of confusion, because what you try to automatically do is to compartmentalize something. Like you see something and you go, you don't say it is a, but you say it is not. Like it is not an airplane, it is not a helicopter, it is not anything that I can put conveniently into a box. But what is it? And then the left brain is trying to analyze in a logical manner, and the right brain is the artistic part that's looking at it, just saying, okay, left brain, shut up. I want to experience this. And so I've had quite a few encounters of things that I can't compartmentalize or put into a box. The first one was on the island of Maui, 1996. I was staying with my sister who lived there for a few months, and I just spent the day windsurfing. And anybody who's done surfing or windsurfing will know that when you're having that experience, you move into a slightly different state of consciousness, because with surfing, your sole function is to focus on the wave. If you think about lunch, you fall off the board. With windsurfing, you have the wave, and you have the wind, and you have the water, and if you think about what you're going to have for dinner, you fall off, and there you go. So your mind is tuned to a very narrow aspect of experience. And so my brother-in-law picked me up from the beach, and we were driving up country Maui, which is going up on the side, which is where Haleakala, the volcano is, Haleakala. And I was looking straight forward, and I saw this metallic object that appeared to be about 200 feet in length. And through the process, what we were doing, we're driving through a series of trees, where the trees from the left side and the right side of the road like intermingle or wrap around each other, creating like a gateway or tunnel to go through. And so I saw it for about 10 minutes, and just the process of elimination that went through my head, where I saw it, And then I thought, oh, it's an airplane. And then I thought, wait a second, airplanes don't go there. Airplanes should be behind me because that's where they land, down at Wailuku. And then I kept looking. There's no tail. There are no wings. There are no windows. The front and the back are exactly the same. It doesn't seem to be moving, or if it is, it's not moving fast enough to be able to stay in the air if it's a heavy object. And we got closer and closer and closer to it, and then we were about to drive right into the driveway where the house was, and it was always right in front of me at all times. And of course, people say, did you take a picture? It's like, you don't take your eyes off a phenomenon like that. It doesn't enter your head, I need a photograph of it. It's like, I want to experience this as long as it lasts. And it lasted about 10 minutes. And some would say, well, did you turn to your brother-in-law and say, look? And like, I couldn't move my hands. It's like, focus, 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 focus. And then all of a sudden, boom, it was gone. I don't know if it shot off or dematerialized, but it was there, and then it wasn't there. And then one other experience, I've had quite a few, but another experience I can tell you is...
Your brother-in-law obviously was talking to you about this and saw the same thing and was...
No, he
didn't.
He was oblivious.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It wasn't until we stopped the car at the house, and I told him, I said, I just saw a UFO for 10 minutes. And he said, oh, I've seen those before. But during the experience, I couldn't turn my neck. I couldn't point out the window.
Wow.
Because I didn't want it to detract from what was going on.
Wow.
Another
What
experience.
What was the shape of it?
It was like a cigar. It may have been a saucer on edge, but the more I think about it, and every time, I've described this quite a few times, and every time I describe it, I'm looking at it in my mind, like through my eyes. So it's not something that I'm making up, because I was interviewed by a police sergeant in England at a conference once, and by the time I gave the description, he's been studying UFO encounters a lot, and he said, I believe you had a real experience based on the detail. Also, it was metallic, but the surface was like polished aluminum. You could see every color in the rainbow, like in it. Those are little details that, came up after my experience. One more is Paracas, again, on the coast of Peru where I live. We were renting a house. For some reason, I decided to go outside at 1 o'clock in the morning. Mysteriously, there was some water on the floor, because it only rains in Paracas half an inch a year, but there was a pool of water I was walking through. And I just looked up and I saw these 12 objects moving in coordination with each other. They weren't moving in a circle, clockwise or counterclockwise, but I could tell they all knew intimately where the other was. And then they moved to the left for about 5 minutes. And then I went inside and I woke my wife up and said, come out, you have to look at this. And she looked up and she said, those are ovnis, which is Spanish for UFO. And then they moved to the right for 5 minutes. And then they slowly started moving up. And I went back inside because I just spent like 12 minutes staring at something, and my eyes couldn't focus on it anymore. And she said, all of a sudden they just either disappeared or they shot all up together. And then a couple of hours later, we were asleep, and she heard this buzzing sound outside the window. And she thought they'd come back, and she was very afraid. And telepathically, I just said, not now, not now, not now. And the sound disappeared. So I think to a great degree, they want us to know that they exist. They show those who are sensitive and open to them that they exist. They're not going to show up on the grounds of the White House or any of that kind of thing. And if you've had one experience, you're open to be able to have other ones, which I think happens to a lot of people. So, and like what you were saying, especially with the people who've been in the military, their experiences very believable. Like Ryan Graves and all of these other people, a very high level in the government, who are the so-called whistleblowers. I believe very much in that their accounts are real. You have radar and FLIR and other kinds of technologies recording this stuff. So it's a very real phenomenon.
Yeah.
And again, for those who try to say they've never been here, they never will be, it's because you've never experienced anything yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And some people actually have experienced it themselves, and they just write it off. It didn't happen. I didn't really see that. I didn't, and they just don't let it. People can have the experience, and they just don't let it enter into their reality. They just say, "Oh, I must have been seeing something," or whatever. I mean, people do that all the time. It's really only the people that are open-minded enough to question reality itself to be able to, to be honest with themselves about what they've actually seen. And surprisingly, that's not everybody. And so when you think about the millions of people who have reported the phenomenon, it's crazy to think about the true number of people who have had experiences if they were honest enough with themselves to admit that they have had these experiences. I mean, there's people like pilots. There's this famous incident at Chicago O'Hare Airport that everybody was reporting, and a saucer was hovering there, and it shot up through the clouds, and it made a hole through the clouds. Well, tons of people saw that, but only a handful of people had the courage to report it or say anything about it. I mean, there was a pilot in an airplane that saw it, but he's just like, I'm not looking. I'm not, he wouldn't even look at it after he had seen it because he didn't want it to interfere with his reality, Mm-hmm. And when someone would talk about it, he would be like, you want to lose your job? That's what they would say. And so it's crazy that there still is that stigma, but luckily that stigma is starting to go away. People are slowly becoming aware of the fact that this phenomenon is real, and they're having the courage to be able to talk about it on things like podcasts, to close loved ones, and over time, that stigma is lifting, and the people who have been the people who have pushed people down and bullied people and made fun of people and persecuted people for talking about this experiences are now being shown as the as the people that they are, closed-minded and unable to deal with and accept reality. And so I think it's things are changing, thankfully, finally, because it's been decades and decades and decades of just mental abuse to people who have had these experiences. So it's good that things are changing.
Yeah, no, I think very much so. Of course, with the advent of the cell phone, the advent of the internet, all of these phenomena are being seen and experienced more and more. The higher, or as time goes on, the higher percentage of the public are stating that they have had experiences and believe in the experiences of other people. So, yeah, I think it's very good and very promising.
Yeah, agreed. Well, good. Yeah. Any other cool experiences that you've had as a human being? Outside of the either within the UFO phenomenon or paranormal or anything else that you can't explain that maybe you haven't even shared yet publicly?
When I was about 8, I had experiences with ghosts, waking up in the middle of the night and then seeing a man and a woman dressed up in like farmers' clothes, so probably from the 1880s or something, like in front of me at the doorway of my bedroom, and then falling asleep and waking up and seeing them like more than once. So I'm, again, as I discuss this, I'm seeing it in my mind's eye. So I think that was a real experience. I had one poltergeist experience, and I think if you're open to any of this, you're open to all of it. So you can have all sorts of different experiences of places, and like you were saying, at that site near Machu Picchu, where you had an emotional experience, I think that's the difference between Egypt and Peru, is that Egypt, again, is much more logical and linear, so it's more of a place of thinking, whereas Peru is a very emotional country. So you're much more likely to have emotional experiences in a location in Peru than you are in Egypt. I remember one time I went to Machu Picchu with this couple, and all of a sudden this guy just started breaking out crying, like spontaneously, from nothing to boom, full blown. And I just left him alone for a while, and after a while he gathered his thoughts, and there was something going on at that location that triggered like a major emotional response in him. And I know I've experienced a lot of people, foreigners who have come to Peru and have had, I wouldn't say life-transforming experiences, but like major emotional responses to these ancient places. They're ancient voices or ancient energies that are working through them and talking to them, not necessarily rarely anything negative, but as I said, Peru is a very emotional-based place, emotional-based culture. You could feel the energy of the ancient people still being around. I've had the great fortune to be able to make very close friendships with a lot of indigenous people from Peru, and they sharing their stories, their family stories and traditions have enhanced my life greatly. Anybody I know of who lives around Cusco or the Sacred Valley has had a UFO experience of one kind or another. So it's a very open society, like Mexico is. The U.S., I think, in general, is more closed-minded because it's more of a logical society than an emotional society. So any emotion-based culture or society is more open to a full mind, left brain, right brain experience. So that's one of the pleasures I have of still living in Peru, is I like living in a family and emotional, cultural-based society rather than a materialistic one.
Yeah, it's almost like it's more of a spiritual based as opposed to a mind based.
Yeah.
Whereas the U.S. is more mind, and people ask, why is it that it's the United States only that has these experiences, and it's not.
No,
it's just not. I mean, South America is a hotbed for UAP UFO experiences.
Oh, yeah. Cusco, the Sacred Valley, Lake Titicaca, and Nazca are real hotbeds of past and present-day UFO activity. But as you say, it's a global phenomenon more and more as time goes on. As cell phone cameras get better, people are able to take higher resolution images and videos of stuff. A lot of stuff is fake, and now the problem is this
AI.
The so-called AI thing where people are making things up. A lot of the recent discoveries that I see on Facebook of ancient discoveries are pure AI.
Yeah.
Based on nothing. And that's a real problem, because it's going to make it difficult for real evidence to ancient evidence to start emerging when you have people fabricating all of this stuff.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, it's going to be a challenge to figure out what's real. The 12 UFOs that you saw, that you and your wife saw in Paracas, what did those look like? What was it lights or was it craft?
Yeah, they were orbs.
Orbs.
They were yellow orbs with a yellow gold interior. It looked like they were pretty far away, but one other experience I had was, again, for some reason, on the roof of the house or the top floor of the house, and I think literally they want me to see them. So I go outside, they show up, just so that I can know that what I'm experiencing is real. So this was about 4 years ago. I think I was looking up at Orion, which you can see from Peru, but it's kind of sideways or compared to the way you see it in North America. And then from the south, I saw this glowing object, like a sphere, glass or plexiglass or something, perfectly round, seemingly about 200 to 300 yards away from me. The ocean is about 300 yards away from where I live. From the south, traveling very slowly to the north, and then disappearing because it was moving in that direction. But I got a very clear look at it for 10 minutes. It was like a golden ball, and then inside was a yellow golden, slightly different shade plasma or flame that was moving around in the center of it. You know, not necessarily in a pattern, but just this. You know, again, I can see it as clear as day as I recount the story. So that was very intriguing.
Almost transparent, but with some sort of like plasma on the interior?
Yeah. I wouldn't say translucent, it was transparent. I could see inside of it, slightly darker yellow inside compared to the ball itself. And yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't call my wife to corroborate it on that occasion, but she's seen a number of things too in the house where we live, and so
yeah. And does that sound similar to what Ryan Graves described with a sphere? I mean, he's describing, I think, a cube within a sphere, but obviously no cube on this. But did the color and the size and the shape, do you know, kind of line up with what he and his pilots were seeing off the coast of Virginia?
Yeah, I don't know if it was the same color or not, because I can't remember. I know he saw a cube inside of a sphere, but yeah, what I saw was a yellow sphere. It didn't seem to be a natural shade of yellow, and then the interior was like a yellow golden flame or plasma that was moving around. I did see it for 10 minutes, so it's not like it was a 3-second thing that then took off.
And how big would you say it was?
Well, from my perspective, I could see it as the size of a soccer ball. So its actual size, I don't know. You have to extrapolate from me to 300 yards, but I guess would be 20 feet in diameter.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's significant. Okay, excellent. Well, let's completely shift gears to close it out then, and just maybe one additional topic, because I have Ben Davidson coming on. He'll be the guest after your episode's released. He's coming on Monday. Today is Friday, as you know, and so we'll record on Monday. But I'm just curious to get your thoughts on kind of his work at Suspicious Observers, and he's very much into this 6,000, 12,000 year catastrophe cycle, and that we're in a pole shift right now, and that we're 6,000 years past the last catastrophe, 12,000 years past the last major catastrophe, and I'm going to learn more about it on Monday, but I was just curious if you've followed much of his work, and if this pole shift conversation resonates with you, and does it align with the 12,000 year Younger Dryas phenomenon, or Younger Dryas event potentially?
Well, I've watched a little bit of his work. That was quite a long time ago, but I think there's a 13,000 year cycle. So every half precession, or every 1/2 of 26,000 years of the so-called Great Year, there are cataclysmic events that happen on the planet. So we're about, the last one, as we've stated, was about 12,800 years ago. So we're due for one coming up very quickly. I personally doubt that it's going to happen within our lifetimes. It could, because events like that are not fixed in time, but it's like it's an estimate. But it's kind of backed up by the work of Dr. Robert Schoch, physicist Paul Laviolette, and others who think that every 13,000 years we enter this phase when there is great disturbances that happen not only to our planet, but also possibly to our solar system. One of the theories by Dr. Paul Laviolette is that the center of our galaxy is a black hole, but that every 13,000 years it actually fills up, because the standard story is that black holes forever will absorb energy. But according to him, every half precessional cycle, the black hole fills up and then emits energy across the galactic plane. And so that could be what happened, as well as the asteroid hypothesis or the meteor hypothesis, that the black hole ejected gamma rays and other forms of energy that went across the galactic plane, entered our solar system, making the planet of Uranus rotate this way, making Venus rotate backwards, and then causing our planet to go from vertical to 23.5 degrees, which is where it is now. I very much believe that our planet is unstable and that it has not always been at that angular axis, but that the North Pole has shifted a number of times based upon intruding phenomena from outside of our solar system causing instability. There are ancient stories of indigenous people who talk about the time that the sky fell. And what they're saying is that one day they would look up to the heavens and they would see, Mars is here and Orion's over here. And then literally the next night, all of a sudden, they see everything's moved somewhere. So talking about that probably the planet has shifted in its axis at different periods of time. I definitely believe that could be a real phenomenon that happens every 13,000 years.
Interesting. And then in terms of the moon itself, do you think that is a completely naturally occurring object, or do you think that there's there's too many coincidences there, and that there's a more interesting story happening with the moon?
Well, it's very curious. Of course, Ben van Kerkwyk recently put up a video where he was talking about the fact that it's, I think, 1/400th the size of the sun at a distance of 1/400th distance as we are from the sun. So it's very curious that when we have an eclipse, it totally covers rather than being partly. So some people, of course, talk about the idea that it's an artificial phenomenon, that when you land on it, it makes a ringing sound. I don't know about any of that. I tend to believe
legit. That's legit. Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to believe it's a natural object, but I'm not quite sure. The fact that we always see the same side of the moon, that it doesn't rotate at a different rate so we can see the dark side of the moon, is very curious. There is some evidence that there are bases, whether they're American or Russian or Chinese or whatever, on the dark side of the moon, that there are structures that were experienced and UFO experienced by NASA astronauts that was completely shut down as soon as they gave that story. Is all very curious. So that's about all I have to say about that.
There's a lot of strange things about the moon.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that the supposed uniform depth of the craters.
Right.
So why they wouldn't be deeper and shallower.
Right. Doesn't matter how big it is or how big the object was that hit it. It doesn't go past a certain depth of the crater, which is odd.
Yeah, very bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, fantastic. This has been a great conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Do you think that we missed anything?
Not as far as I can tell. I'd be very honored to come back at some point in time. But it's been a pleasure.
Great.
Thank you for flying me all the way from Peru to do this, because normally a podcast these days is through the internet, through Zoom or something. So to physically be here and meet you and see all these beautiful objects and your crew has been a wonderful experience, Matt.
Awesome. Yeah, Ryan and Joe are the best, and yeah, it's the only way to do a podcast. Really, is in person. I did a few that were virtual early on, and just decided it's not worth it. This is the best way to connect with somebody and to meet and connect and really hear what the guest is all about, and to get the full experience. You got to be in person. So again, can't thank you enough for making the trip up here, because like I said, that's not an easy trip. And I know in the last several years, you haven't really done a lot of podcasts, like outside podcasts. You created a lot of great, phenomenal content on your own channel, but to sit down with me for this podcast is quite an honor on my side. And I just very much appreciate your time and the effort that it took to get here. And yeah, I would absolutely love to have you back at some point in time, and we can get an update and do another one. But yeah, this has been tremendous. I'm extremely grateful and really enjoyed our time.
Me too. Thank you.
Awesome. Very good. Well, that's a wrap, man.